Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of SO Live. I'm Danny Flexen, and delighted, as always, to be joined by my brother in arms, my Robin to my Batman. It's Ayman Khan.
Whoa, 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 whoa. I'm not sure about the Robin to your Batman. I think maybe we'll have to switch those roles around potentially. But, I'm happy to see another sunny day. Happy to see another boxing event. Happy to be speaking about it too with yourself.
I've only just got back about half an hour ago from the press conference for Joshua Buatsi and Dan Aziz. Wasn't a load of people there, still more than IFL Live last night, from what I've been told. But yeah, very good to meet up with all the old faces. There was nearly a ruck on stage between Chris Congo and Florian Marku, two fighters who aren't even on the Buatsi Aziz bill. But I've stepped in, of course, and tried to break things up and smooth things over.
As
I had a
Batman.
few, yeah, like Batman. I had a few stern words for both combatants or wannabe combatants, and I think my authority that they felt through my voice, I think that was enough to convince them of a better path. And yeah, so I saved the day, basically, is what I'm saying.
You're like the traditional boxing version of Fred Beck when Fred stepped in to stop that fracas between, who was it? Dylan Dennis and Anthony Taylor. So you played your part for sure.
I am often compared to Fred Beck.
Mm-hmm.
We are kindred spirits. It's
Mm-hmm.
been said before. Um, we're here more than anything, though, to talk about Anthony Joshua and his second fight with new trainer Derek James against Robert Helenius, and he did deliver the highlight reel knockout, which fans were begging for. However, it took him till rather later in the fight than the people at the O2 would have liked, and there were a few boos, maybe more than a few, thrown in Joshua's direction, or certainly in direction of the fight, before he found that stunning finish. What did you make of his performance overall?
Yeah, look, overall, I think if this Deontay Wilder fight is happening like we're being told it's happening, then the job that Anthony Joshua needed to do was done, irrespective of how many rounds it took to get there. He's got himself unhurt, unblemished, and also not defeated heading into that fight too. Which late opponents, late replacements have had success in the past, most infamously against Andrew Ruiz. But look, I think the lasting impression we'll get from this fight is Joshua's KO. That's what people remember. That's what people will take back from the performance itself. And it was a hellacious knockout. When Hellenius gets knocked out, he's very much someone who you want to have on the end of your punch, because you get something very visible, very viral, very visceral too. So look, I think it's job done for us. For him, for us fans to see that Wilder fight. Hopefully that job gets done as the Saudis are over to tie up that deal. But we can dissect maybe some of the disappointing sides of it too as well, and get the thoughts and opinions of people in the chat too. But look, for me to sum it up, job done for Anthony Joshua heading into a Wilder fight.
Are the most interactive show on boxing YouTube, so make sure you get your comments and questions in. We'll go through and read out as many of those as we can during our time on air. Abdul Jimo said, this was even before we came on, Joshua needs at least 2 more fights to be fully prepared for Wilder. Donald Berry has just dived into the chat and said, nope, he's too gun shy, responding to the question, of course, in the title of the video. And that seems to kind of reflect a lot of the criticism I saw aimed at Joshua, not just in this fight, but in his first one alongside Derek James against Jermaine Franklin, in that he is gun shy, apprehensive, second guessing himself, the older chestnut caught between styles, as we hear far too much, in my opinion. AJ NXI or XNI, I don't know how to pronounce that, says he not. And I think as while that's maybe broken English, it is pretty on the button, perhaps. Maybe he's not ready for Wilder. I interviewed Johnny Nelson today at the aforementioned press conference, and he said that if the fight were made next, and he doesn't expect it to be, but if it were made next, his money would be on Wilder. And he said he believes that AJ still hasn't quite recovered that self-assurance that he had previously. So we shall have to see how that pans out. But yeah, let's talk about the performance as much as the knockout, and why the fans were booing. What was your interpretation?
Look, I'd imagine that fans were booing because they're expecting there's an expectation level of what Joshua performances have been in the UK in the past specifically, and I don't think the last two performances. Well, I mean, in Franklin to a degree, I think he kind of teed off a little bit more on Franklin. Maybe we need to see the punch output stats compared to Helenius in the Franklin fight. But for me, it felt like he kind of threw a lot less and was more hesitant and cautious of Helenius than he was of Franklin. And then in general, as well in the UK, having seen Joshua fight before, I think he just wasn't that form of anti-Joshua who kind of gives you those little bursts of excitement and give you those opportunities to roar for him, because he's throwing some combinations at his opponent. He just seemed to not want to throw that. So I think that's why the fans there at the O2 weren't all kind of backing him, which is a bit of a shame, to be honest with you. It have to be said, that's a bit of a shame, having had that support throughout the years, for him to, try to be on the climb up to kind of to receive that audible kind of feedback. But then again, the fans, they have their opinion, they have their say, and they bought a ticket to do and say what they want, and they weren't happy about it. And maybe AJ does have to heed that too, that sort of side of it that he has supplied in the past. He has to keep supplying it as well in the future. If he wants to keep, if he wants to go on this style change journey, there has to be an element of entertainment brought with it too.
But you get to give your opinion. Tatar, tater. Is it potato? Is it American slang for breasts? I have no idea.
There's three potatoes here then, is there?
There is now, yeah. Wilder gets hit a lot too, just hasn't fought powerful punchers. It's a question of who gets hit first. That's a valid point, I think. But I think it's who puts themselves in the best position to land those heavy shots as well. And I'll expand upon that in a minute. Morgan Harrison says doesn't throw any combinations anymore. Yeah, I mean, I can see that point. Probably doesn't throw as many as he used to, certainly. George Andreas says he showed caution as he had a last-minute change of opponent, but he got the job done with a show rule knockout in the end. Yeah, I mean, I think the way I see it, my concern for AJ principally going into the Wilder fight, particularly if it is next, and we're not sure, we'll talk about that in a minute, because I know Malik Scott was ringside, Wilder's trainer at the Helenius fight, and he said he thinks Wilder will fight once more in October before facing AJ early next year. And I think Joshua himself and Hearn want to fight in the interim also. But the concern I have is that if AJ's that tentative, apprehensive, getting into range against Hellenius, who is tall, who is rangy, but isn't the puncher, the fearsome knockout artist that Wilder is, how much more concerned and apprehensive and, slow is he going to be at getting into range against someone who does carry that concussive power? An AJ on the back foot, an AJ who isn't attacking or aggressive or has that self-belief may not be a great Joshua to go up against Wilder. That's my concern.
Yeah, I get that, but I also kind of think, firstly, to directly answer kind of from what I saw of Joshua's displays in this fight and in Franklin and trying to adopt this new kind of style, I think he's trying to appropriate and get used to being in space and being in a range to fight with this new style. I think he was kind of like pouring out that jab against Hellenius and against Franklin, trying to get accustomed to throwing and getting ready to throw that right hand. And when that right hand is thrown, it's landed so that you've caused damage. So you don't have to worry too much about something coming back. That's my small kind of analysis of what I see with Joshua's hesitation in the previous two fights that he's had. And maybe that will come a cropper against someone like Wilder. But I think boxing fans kind of have to maybe cut the ties with this whole Joshua of the past kind of thing. That's why I'm wearing the double denim here. We're going for the throwback, and that throwback of anti-Joshua, the visuals of him being the destructive force of the past. Don't think we're getting that anymore. I think we've got to dash that out and put that out of our minds now, because he seems in bed and all in and developing a new style. He's very much one of these people who's loves to learn. He puts that out in any interviews that he has. He's always watching boxing and he's looking to adopt a new style. And I think it's gone now. I think this new style is very much in. We've got to really kind of abandon those thoughts about what we saw from him in the past. So I think he's got to get a lot of credit for wanting to do that, first of all, wanting to go under the tutelage and stewardship of Derek James and try and learn something different, especially when he's admitted he's an 8-round fighter, so he has to conserve to a degree over 12 rounds. He's an aging fighter, so doesn't have the stamina, the gas tank to put those combinations out as he did in the past. And if you look at it in the scope of the heavyweight division, specifically Tyson Fury, who went from being a boxer to a brawler now, or at least has that in the locker. We've not seen that boxing side from Tyson since he switched. If AJ is able to do the inverse, he's got to get a lot of credit. And if he's able to get an actual credible win, specifically against Deontay Wilder doing that style, then he's back on top.
Double denim, the old Canadian tuxedo, might have been in mourning for the Callum Smith-Paturbio fight being cancelled, and thus your trip with it. Although, what is it? It's been rescheduled for January or something, like ages later. But yeah, moving on from that fashion chat, as much as everyone loves it, I think AJ seems to be in a strange place still mentally as well. It's kind of, I don't know if this is something he needs to gain redemption ultimately and to get back to where he was, but the whole kind of everyone's against me and, people don't like me anymore and they only like you when you're winning and all that kind of stuff that was apparent in the build-up to this fight. And what was quite a low-key build-up, I guess, primarily because of what happened with Dillian Whyte and, Helenius stepping in at short notice. And he wasn't the most popular replacement, although I can completely understand why he was suitable. It's a tough one, isn't it? And AJ, will he ever? Because like you said, maybe we do just have to accept the fact that the old AJ's gone, dead and gone, and he's never coming back. Do you know what I mean? But it's hard to do that because that's the AJ that won legions of fans and increased the popularity of the sport in the UK once again. Sorry, just going to one comment in the chat. You can come back in. Take Me Back Pirate Radio Archive says, hesitation is never a good thing to have in the ring. Fury, Canelo, and Crawford don't show signs of it, and those are the hallmarks of greatnesses. I think that's fair, although what I would say is that those three guys have never been stopped or knocked out in the pros, and I think that's probably part of it. Do you know what I mean? Unless you know that you can be hurt and hurt to the point that you can't continue, we know Fury's got up from Wilder's power, for example, then you won't have that hesitation necessarily. It's probably something that's bred in you from past trauma without meaning to get too deep about it. And AJ's been through that. The losses to Usyk, he might have been hurt in one of them, but for the most part, he was just outboxed. Against Andy Ruiz, and again, against a short notice opponent as Hellenius was, he got his world turned absolutely upside down. So I kind of understand a bit of caution. George Andreas says he's got a question, so Ayman, you can take this one. Do you think Joshua can successfully keep his head off the line for long enough to beat Wilder? Oh, so a message from Ayman. Electricity tripped. I'll be back ASAP. Be back in about a minute. So I lied. I'm going to answer this question instead. Do you think Joshua can successfully keep his head off the line for long enough to beat Wilder? I think he can if he boxes an incredibly disciplined fight and concentrates for every minute of every round. I think the problem he has with that, though, is that in doing so, he'll be mitigating or neglecting his own attacks. And I think to keep Wilder kind of honest and to keep him in a position where you can land your own shots and be effective, you do need to keep him moving and you need to keep him guessing and adapting. And, that's a bit of an issue because we saw Fury have great success against Wilder, not just by changing things up and going forward, but also by stepping in, by changing the angles, by moving laterally as well. And I think that's important if Joshua is going to have success. Young Jesus, or maybe Jesus, because Jesus himself was pretty young, wasn't he, as the story goes. AJ will drag Wilder into deep waters and he picks him apart like I hope that's a shark, young Jesus. Yeah, that's possible. But who have we seen genuinely drag Wilder into deep waters? Only Fury, really. And he had to go through a lot of his own kind of punishment to get there as well. And we'd have to see AJ come through that in a way that we haven't seen him recover from punishment since Klitschko, I guess. Thunder Road says, your thoughts on, great album, by the way, your thoughts on LFC standing for Lavia Fernandez Saicedo. I think it's a bit embarrassing, to be honest, that he's made his feelings perfectly clear that he'd rather go to Chelsea. and we're still hanging in there, you know, trying to get him. It's like, you know, a girl turning you down several times. Never happened to me. It's just what I've heard. And you're still there texting and, you know, whatever, messaging on social media. Give it up. There's other people for that price that can do the same job who would be delighted to join such a successful historic club. Bill Morlett, why is the camera wobbling about so much? Whose camera, Bill? Mine or Ayman's? If it's mine, it's probably because I'm, I don't know, maybe nervously bouncing the laptop around. It's a webcam that's attached to the top of the laptop. So, you know, it's not some disease or something I've got. I'm not shaking at the prospect of talking about AJ. But yeah, now I'm watching it on YouTube at the same time. I can see it moving a lot. So it obviously is me. I can only apologize. I will try and be more stable, both mentally and physically. Sultan Ibrahimov, presumably not the former top heavyweight, but maybe a fan of his, said, is AJ's gas tank still his biggest issue? I think it stops him from being an elite 12-round fighter. He still fears gassing out, it seems. Yeah, I mean, that's possible. I don't know if he fears gassing out or he fears getting caught or he fears getting countered as he was so successfully against Usyk, or successfully for Usyk anyway. But whichever way you look at it, he's certainly second-guessing himself. And you can't, in my view, you can't afford to do that against someone like Wilder. Nemo de Bahia, Brazil, definitely butchered that, says Anthony seems to have lost his instincts and is relying heavily on the coach. Possibly, but what a coach to rely upon, if that is true. RJT says, I'm sorry, Dan. AJ, as much as I love him, ain't no Fury with the skills. Think it might just be who lands first. RJT, you don't have to apologise to me, mate. I'm not like AJ's biggest fan. If anything, I'm probably, you know, more known for an association with Fury than AJ. But I'm not saying he's got Fury skills, but then Fury's unique. There isn't another heavyweight on the planet, or even in the last 20 years, that's got a similar skill set as Fury. But AJ can employ a game plan that's enough to outbox Wilder, I think, without getting KTFO on the way. But he's got to have that self-confidence. He's got to have that self-assurance back. And talking of self-assurance back, I believe my colleague Ayman Khan has now returned.
Am I here? We're talking about hesitancy. I'm a little bit hesitant. Am I here? Am I present? Am I live? What am I? What's this connection?
Are you willing to come forward? Are you willing to take chances to win?
Willing to take chances, willing to step forward, willing to line that knockout blow. Is Anthony Joshua willing to do that against Deontay Wilder? Can he keep his head off the line to avoid a Deontay Wilder punch? I think so. I think there are paths to victories for Anthony Joshua against Deontay Wilder. Maybe a few less than Deontay Wilder has, but Deontay Wilder essentially has one. So actually, maybe a few more than Deontay Wilder. That is the biggest issue, though. Look, a lot of people see a sense of fragility, and the sense of fragility from Anthony Joshua has really come through since the Dillian White fight. And a lot of people wanted to make the comparison to Frank Bruno in that, you know, once Frank Bruno got hit, you can really get to him mentally, you can beat him in the build-up, and you know half the job was done before you stepped through the ropes. I don't know if there's a bit of projection, a bit of force in that kind of comparison to Frank Bruno. And I sort of quite liked Anthony Joshua's approach to a degree in this, who, when his promoter says, look, he needs to kind of get up for fights, and Dillian White was the fighter he expected, and he had to have his post removed because of failed performance-enhancing substances in his system. Someone like Helenius, maybe you have to stick it on him. Maybe you have to kind of create a false little beef to kind of really want to go at your opponent who's coming in to save your event. But look, like there's still a lot of success and a lot of good fights in the future for Anthony Joshua. But I wouldn't write him out against a fight against Deontay Wilder for sure. I don't think AJ's got that ability to have one concussive shot that'll put Wilder out. But let's not forget there are question marks around Wilder, who apparently has a dent in his head and had he had two hellacious fights against Tyson Fury and got resoundingly outboxed in the first one. AJ's not going to replicate what Fury did in the first one, but could something similar work? Maybe.
Is that an octopus on Ayman's head? I mean, maybe that'd make me Fabrizio Ravanelli, certainly, with the old white feather, which I'll take. If I had his skills, I'd be happy. Porter says, Chisora is completely spent now, looked terrible. Washington took it easy on him. His legs were all over the place along with his punches. No one should issue him a license again, was a sad watch, 100. Porter, we will be talking about the undercard in due course, and we'll take your comments under advisement. Liam66 says, if Wilder can land jab on AJ, fight's over, next punch. Well, yeah, I mean, I imagine the right hand would be following, but yeah, I mean, I think AJ's trying to kind of go in that vein himself, in that he's trying to set things up behind the jab and use it as a, either a blind or a setup for the right hand. But in doing so, he could leave himself open. I saw someone commented earlier that he got hit a lot with the jab from Helenius, and Hellenius doesn't have the fastest jab. It's certainly true to say. So, yeah, I mean, that is a concern. But then Wilder's not known as having this amazing jab and, using it to great advantage. So, of all AJ's worries going into a potential Wilder fight, I wouldn't say that's the number one. Ayman, are you still there?
Yeah, sorry, my bad. Yeah, look, yeah, of course, the right hand from Deontay Wilder is the biggest concern for Anthony Joshua in that fight. If that fight does get made towards the end of the year, that's still up for discussion. Those discussions we think are happening right now, so we'll await an announcement on that. But look, maybe he needs a fight in between to kind of show that ruthlessness. I think Derek Chisora said in the wake of that fight that Anthony Joshua should now have his confidence back. If that knockout does wonders for Joshua, then he's in the best place now to take that fight with Deontay Wilder. But look, I think there's a lot of kind of want to kind of maybe see Anthony Joshua fail and not kind of go through this process of trying to better himself. And I think with someone who's looking to improve and add and really kind of throw himself into what finally kind of, he brought Robert Garcia over. That a lot happened in that space in between moving to Derek James with Robert Garcia, and it didn't really work out. But now he's kind of invested himself over in Dallas, I believe it is, looking to kind of really kind of hone his craft there with a bunch of killers too in that gym. Of course, Errol Spence didn't come out with the victory that he wanted, but look, a well-accomplished fighter amongst a number of other well-accomplished fighters. I think it's going to take a lot more than what we saw from Anthony Joshua in the past. Would people have picked him? Would people have picked Anthony Joshua pre-Ruiz to beat Deontay Wilder? You still have serious concerns about that version of Anthony Joshua against Deontay Wilder. A lot of people would still pick that version of Anthony Joshua to lose against Deontay Wilder. So I think there needs to be more strings in Anthony Joshua's bone. He's looking to add that to his skill set. So we'll see. Look, it's very hard to tell. I want to know what you think as to who you believe would win in that fight between Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder if it does happen this year or early next year. But look, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion as a lot of people seem to be making out in the midst of what seem to be less than stellar performances from Anthony Joshua at the moment.
News, a poll's just gone out. I say it like I had nothing to do with it, but yeah, we've just put a poll out. Who's going to win if they fight next, Joshua or Wilder? Let us know what you think, and we'll give you the poll results towards the end of the show. We are going to talk a bit about the undercard of Joshua. He said Joshua against Wilder. Joshua against Hellenius, which had its moments, it's fair to say. Also had its sleep-inducing moments, unfortunately, but we will talk about that. But before we do, I want to talk a little bit about where I've been today, or not the geographical element of it. I was at the Joshua Buatsi Dan Aziz press conference for the Boxer Show in London Bridge today. And apart from, as I said earlier, what was it, Florian Marku and Chris Congo nearly going at it, even though neither of them are on that show. One thing that was a bit of a surprise is that I interviewed Ben Shalom, the boxer promoter. He only did 2 interviews, I believe, across the whole day. And similar vein in both mine and the other one, in that he really went in on Matchroom, which wasn't expected at all. He's been taking a lot of stick recently from Eddie Hearn, but particularly from Frank Smith, about pulling Richard Riakporhe out of purse bids on the day of the bids for a world title shot against Jai Opatea. And I asked him about his side of the story for that, why they withdrew him, why they left it so long, etc. And yeah, he just suddenly went in and said, I think everyone knows that there's one, I'm paraphrasing, but it's not far off. Everyone knows there's one boxing promotional company that's out to disrupt us, that tries to mess things up for us every time we try to make a fight. They tried to stop us. And for someone who said he wants to work with other promoters and has spent ages talking about, you know, not getting involved in the tittle-tattle and the tit-for-tat and anything else that sounds like tit and tat with other promoters, he really just unprovoked, well, not unprovoked, because he was provoked by Matchroom at times, but certainly not provoked by me or led in that direction, just decided to go in on Matchroom and say, look, you know, we think they're working against us, which I found really interesting. Ayman, what do you make of that?
Well, no promoter is going to be working specifically with any other promoter. That's just the nature of the business, the nature of the competition. Each promoter wants to be on top right now, and we've seen the shift of the paradigm shift of power in the UK specifically, with Eddie leaving Sky Sports to DAZN, and there's been opportunity for Frank Ryan, BT Sports, and Queensbury to have, or TT Sports now, to have a bit of a resurgence. So this whole kind of idea of promoters working together, I love to see it really kind of fall into fruition. It seems to have happened a little bit more with fights that have been made, as opposed to having to be ordered by regulation bodies. But look, I think Shalom maybe was backed into a little bit of a corner here, because we've had a string of fights specifically from outside the boxer sphere, where there's always been traditionally vocality from Eddie Hearn. That's always what you're gonna get for good and bad. Eddie Hearn's gonna say his piece, and there's been a look, or at least position or approach, sorry, I should say, from the boxer team and Ben Shalom's team to specifically say, look, this isn't good for business, the back and forth. We'll just say our piece when it comes to us and not get involved in that, which I admire. I generally do admire to a degree, and I do think it is actually probably better for the sport to take that point of view. However, in the consequence, you don't get your side. So whatever is said kind of becomes accepted if you don't give it a little bit of pushback. So I think Shalom probably felt that he needed to give that speech to you, what he said to you about, you know, people not working together with him. Look, maybe if Matchroom and Boxer got together and spoke about it, they would work well to then get some fights, you know, across the table, and the fans would benefit from that. But the likelihood of that happening, I'm not so sure. But look, I think if Shalom is looking to speak a little bit more, I think that's for the benefit of Boxer's position too, because let's not forget, they had someone specifically to do that in Adam Smith, who is very good at kind of not being aggressive in his responses, but also getting the skyline out and dismissing points of view, or dismissing negative kind of points that Boxer and Sky would face. They've lost that now. So Shalom, to a degree, has to adopt that if he chooses to. Seems like he is right now.
We've all been waiting for, I think. The Apex Predator has entered the chat. Mr. RKO himself, Randy Orton. I hope and pray it's the real one. And, you know, he says Fury was able to use speed and range to beat Wilder from outside and bully him inside. AJ isn't as mobile and hasn't shown any decent inside game for a while. AJ allowed Helenius to hold too much. Yeah, but I think this is the new AJ. It's how to be aggressive, how to be a front foot counter puncher, but while starting at range and working his way in. I don't think the AJ of old, as Ayman was alluding to earlier, exists anymore. And it's a shame. Thunder Road says, Boxer does not have the funds to compete with Matchroom purse bids. Richard would have to go to Australia to fight Jai on the zone card. Yeah, I mean, from what Ben said in the interview, and it is up on the channel now if you want to watch it, not right now because you're watching this, but when you finish, perhaps you could move straight onto it. He said that there were a couple of deals in place with Jai's manager for Richard to go out to Australia and take on Opetire over there, and they would verbally agreed it before the issue with Opetire signing a co-promotional deal or whatever it is with Matchroom. How much you believe of that, you know, watch the video, see what you think, and watch what Hearn and Frank Smith have had to say about it. But I think there was no there was no fear or unwillingness on Reactpor's part, on the part of Boxer, for him to go over and fight him over there. But yeah, so I don't know how much of it was to do with money. Take Me Back Pirate Radio Archives again says, one thing is for certain, AJ has rediscovered his power and must improve his movement to get the opportunity to use it. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I was saying. He can't afford to stay still second-guessing himself in front of Wilder, who's got that massive knockout power. You know, he needs to get the right angles and the right positioning to keep Wilder off balance and guessing and moving himself. Whether he can do that, we shall see. But I think we're going to talk about the undercard now, because we've talked a lot about Joshua until something develops. We've kind of exhausted the possibilities, but the undercard itself, and we'll start with Chisora because someone made a comment on it earlier. Most people watching seem to feel that Gerald Washington had done enough to win. There didn't seem to be too many complaints, however, that Chisora was awarded what was perhaps a sentimental verdict in some cases. But it does seem like the end of the line. And I guess my principal concern is that because he got the decision, surely that makes him more likely to continue than retire.
I don't know, because he didn't get wiped out. I think someone like Chisora, look, I'm projecting my feelings on how he wants to continue his career, but I don't think Chisora would like to end on a fight where he felt he could perform more. If he was wiped out against someone like Gerald Washington, I think that'll be it. There'll be a lot of calls to call quits, and a lot of people will kind of look at maybe trying to do a deal with him with a lot more hesitancy than they do now because of losing to someone like of the caliber of Gerald Washington. But look, I think that wasn't, even in recent performances, we haven't seen Chisora kind of put out that type of performance. So, something was a little bit off there with Chisora outside of kind of the actual doubts or the apparent doubts that we have about him anyway. So no, I think there would have been legs potentially in Chisora still continuing. I've said my piece about Derek last week out, and I'll reiterate again quickly. I just said, look, he's medically cleared, and if he's medically cleared, then he can fight. And if he wants to continue, then he should be allowed to do so. Do I want to see him in competitive fight? Do I want to see him in fights against the top level fighters in the heavyweight division? No. Do I want to see him potentially in competitive fights where he could get a win like that, but in a fight more entertaining? Yeah, sure. But it's down to him, and boxing fans don't really have much say in what they, apart from paying with their money as to choose whether to buy a ticket or not to his fight. So that's really kind of the lay of land when it comes to Chisora. But no, I think he would have continued unless he was on the end of something devastating at the weekend.
Problem with the, if he's medically cleared, he can carry on argument is that being medically cleared currently doesn't take into account what's going to happen to his health in the future. And I think sometimes there is a case of the eye test as well. If you see someone fighting regularly and getting a bit of a beating regularly, even in victory sometimes, like the Carlos Takam fight springs to mind, where he took an absolute shellacking for round after round. And it was right that fight wasn't stopped because he came back to win it. But the flip side of that is, look how much punishment he's taking, considering what we know now and what we're finding out more all the time about CTE, early onset dementia and problems like that. Do we want to, Chisora gives us all a lot of fun, and we want to, a lot of action that we've enjoyed, and we want him to, get what he wants, and we want him to be fulfilled in his life. But the flip side of that is we don't want him to be a gibbering wreck because of boxing in his later life away from the sport. So, I think you can look beyond whether someone passes a medical and it's just an arbitrary decision that way. Randy Orton can't get enough of us now. He says, why do you think Chisora hasn't gone down the exhibition route? Is he not a big enough star outside boxing to get the purse he's after? I'd be happy him fighting some UFC guy. Randy, I said almost exactly the same thing at the press conference today to one of the other journalists, is that he really could have done with the Ngannou fight. There were talks about it. And for someone like Chisora, whose skills have faded a bit, but he still knows enough to look after himself, fighting someone from the UFC or from another sports background would be absolutely perfect. To get that sort of money for that level of risk, surely that's what we want exhibitions to be about. Not for someone like Tyson Fury, who's in the prime of his career, to make easy money against Francis Ngannou. Now I've said that, he'll probably get chinned. But the point is, exhibition should be like for a Chisora or even a Mayweather, who's got plenty of money, obviously. But, he's finished his career. He's not talking about fighting Crawford or Spence. And he's just making money at minimal risk. And I don't think it's because he's not a big enough name. I think he is a big enough name, maybe not to fight Ngannou because that's the top of the pile, but a fairly well-known UFC guy. Yeah, I don't see why not. And I don't see why Hearn wouldn't put that on. Fighting Gerald Washington for whatever he got for that, I don't see how that helps him. It doesn't get him any closer to a world title shot if that's his aim. It gets him on a big bill, so he'll get a decent purse. But I'm sure he could get more for less risk and pertinently less miles on the clock. I'm not acting like I'm, Chisora's best mate or anything, and I'm desperate for him to, look after himself, but I'm still human. I don't want him to keep going out there for, medium reward and get pounded on a regular basis until, he doesn't know his own name. Sorry to be so crude, but, it does get there.
When the book got released, I purchased a copy of Trish Dixon's Damage, and I'm about 100 pages in. I do this thing sometimes where I buy a book and I leave it for a bit and I try to kind of get through it. So I need to pick it back up. So look, I get it. And Chisora, if according to this book, and like you said about the kind of hallmarks and signs of CT, maybe he is kind of displaying those sort of things that are read or spoken about in this book. But like, there was an interesting little tidbit in the press conference that was revealed where he said, like, it's not Eddie Hearn that's putting me on here, it's Skills Challenge who are putting me on here. So maybe that's a little bit of a sign to say that Matchroom didn't want to specifically have him on. Maybe they, I know obviously he ended up on there, but that's the point. That's the barrier. The barrier. What really can the fan do? What really can we do other than voice our opinion? It's the promoters and the people who are matchmaking, making fights to say no. You've had enough. We don't want you on anymore. People don't want to see you on. So unless there's that reaction to not buy a ticket, nothing will change in the situation.
It is an embarrassment. Why should a current WBC champion fight someone with zero professional boxing record? I can give you several million reasons why Universal Nihi, and as long as the sport is set up in such a way. I see, watching the playback now, I can see Ayman actually showed the screen Tris Dixon's book. I saw Tris today. He'll be delighted with that free plug. Fury is doing it for money, but the sport is allowing him to do so. The WBC aren't pressing him to fight a mandatory or even a voluntary. His promoters aren't insisting he fight a fellow boxer, and everyone stands to make a lot of money from him not doing that, from him actively not defending his title and meeting someone from another sport who's got next to no chance. So I don't blame anyone involved for doing it. I blame the structure of the sport that allows it to happen. Take Me Back Pirate Radio Archive says, I'm not happy with this new trend of fighters moving up several weight classes. Are you? One division is fair enough, Mo. I think the kind of weight jumps from, welter to middle and that kind of thing, which were quite common in the old days where there were only 8 traditional weight classes, should be reserved these days for elite fighters, because I think when you've got an elite skill set, it can potentially compensate for a lack of size or a size disadvantage. So, if Crawford wanted to move up to middleweight, as he talked about, or just under, to fight Canelo, which is never going to happen because Canelo is never going to see middleweight again. But if he wanted to do that and it was possible, I wouldn't have a massive problem with that. Same with Charlo going up 2 weight classes to fight Canelo because he's undisputed in his weight division. He's clearly an elite fighter. But I think, Conor Benn going up 2 weight classes to fight Chris Eubank Jr., they're not elite fighters necessarily. And I think Eubank Jr.'s size and strength is quite a big part of his success. So that I'm not so keen on. So I think it just depends on the situation. Young Jesus says, Chisora is like the Kimbo Slice of boxing. His hands are legally dangerous. Very good, very good. Salt and Ibragimov again. Aren't brain scans of boxers compared to previous? And if there's marked damage, they can enforce rests. Yeah, to an extent. So if there's significant changes from a previous brain scan, yes. But you won't necessarily see that. Like, someone can develop symptoms of CTE, pugilistica, dementia, and so on after they've retired, even if there were no obvious signs during their career. So it's a tricky one, because legally, stopping someone from boxing, or even the Boxing Board of Control withdrawing their license because of what you think is going to happen, is quite a difficult one and a slippery slope. However, what I would say is that if a journeyman loses 5 fights in a row here in the UK and they're all by knockout, the board are pretty quick to suspend them or withdraw their license. They don't usually quibble over stuff like that, and everyone just accepts it because it's Chisora and he's so beloved and he's such a big star on TV and so on. Then I think there's more reluctance to step in and do the right thing. And I think Evander Holyfield, you remember he had that heart murmur issue, and his license was taken away by most of the major state athletic commissions in the US. And eventually he won it back when he could prove that there was no issue medically anymore. But the main reason a lot of those places took away his license was because they saw a decline in performance. It wasn't just about the medical issue. So, these bodies can do stuff. They're not handcuffed by legislation necessarily. Thunder Road says, in June, Bam Rodriguez and Sonny Edwards agreed to fight, and now it is announced for December 16th. Is one of them hurt? 6 months for a featherweight title fight. Well, Thunder Road, it's not featherweight, it's flyweight. Hopefully that's a Freudian slip. But also, I think this is a trend recently. Ayman, I'd like to get your view on this. It seems that fights are getting announced so much earlier now. Like Fury and Garner, although it's a different type of fight, was announced several months ahead of time. Joshua Wilder hasn't been officially announced, but they're looking at January. It does seem like fights are being announced a lot earlier than they used to be.
I don't know what it is. I can't really pinpoint it. The thing that comes straight to my mind is potentially that maybe they're looking to specifically with this fight, down at the low weights, there isn't a lot of money involved in terms of purses, in terms of interest as well too. Maybe they're looking to kind of see how much interest there is. I believe the zone have a metric for how much a fighter is worth and how much interest they'll draw. And maybe they're looking to kind of garner that information and then see if they want to go ahead with that fight specifically. Look, it stands to be a great fight between the two. Who doesn't want to see the fight between, a consummate boxer, puncher versus someone who skates around the ring and really kind of makes fools of their opponents? And in fights recently has looked to kind of stand their ground a bit and trade a little bit too. Real hardcore boxing fights fans, but the hardcore boxing fights fans drive subscriptions, so they drive memberships, maybe not as much these days. So I think there might be that part of it that's playing into that aspect as well. Maybe let's make no bones about it. I don't know if Sonny Edwards has been. I don't know where first of all this fight is taking place. Is it taking place in America? I think Sonny expressed his hesitancy as to whether he'll be going over to America anytime soon because of previous links to MTK. Maybe that's part of it. They need to clear as to whether Sonny can get over to America and that fight can take place. Other fighters who are linked to MTK in the past have been over. Josh Taylor, obviously, most recently was over, so maybe that has now passed. But maybe that plays into that part specifically. But I think the wider element of this is potentially to do with garnering an understanding of what fight fans want.
Wow, he said it, folks. Who would have guessed that on only the second episode of SO Live, MTK would be mentioned and not by me? Amazing. I could take the day off.
I guess you can, but it's a genuine issue. Like,
I completely agree with you, but I think most people would have bet that it'd be me bringing it up if it was MTK or Sonny related, in fact. But yeah, fair play. Auditing London and the World says Wilder will send AJ to the Shadow Realm. I mean, so many people overuse that phrase now. I think the Shadow Realm must be getting pretty crowded. But yeah, I mean, Wilder's got the power to knock anyone out. It's just whether AJ can refine his skill set and his new style enough to negate what Wilder's got to offer. Thunder Road says the Rodriguez-Edwards fight is in Glendale, Arizona. Oh, I knew that, Thunder Road. I just hadn't mentioned it yet. Where the Navarrete-Valdez fight was just held. Yeah, I mean, Rodriguez is going to be very much the home fighter in terms of crowd and stuff. But obviously Edwards is with Matchroom, so we'll see how that goes. Sultan Ibragimov says, is English boxing worse off as a punter now MTK have gone? Cards are getting worse, it seems. I don't think that's because MTK have gone, Sultan, and that's not to knock them. It's just the fact that there's a lot more TV promoters now, and so the talent pool is diluted and the match quality that we can put together is diluted. I don't think it's anything to do with MTK, either positive or negative. I think the MTK or former MTK fighters are still very active, albeit on the shows of the TV promoters. I guess the problem is that there's so many of those major promoters now. They're all protecting their own fighters and keeping them in-house and their deals with their broadcast partners. And that's why we don't see as much. Chuck D, Public Enemy's finest. It's crazy this. We've had so many celebrities in the chat. Randy Orton, Chuck D. I'm loving it. AJ's new defense first strategy will make it a nightmare for Wilder to land a big right. And Deontay Wilder is open each time he throws a jab. Yeah, I suppose. But at some point, you do have to put it on Wilder. I don't think AJ can win the fight simply by staying on his back foot and countering. I don't think he's got the skill set to do that for 12 rounds and the discipline and not get KO'd. Take me back, Pirate Radio Archives. What's your view on Prince Nassim's son making debuts? Sons making debuts. Well, only one of them's officially making his debut soon. And that's Adam, of course, who is Going to be on the big fight out in Poland, big undercard for that. Usyk Dubois. I don't know. I think it's difficult. I think as we've seen from Conor Benn and more recently from Campbell Hatton, filling the shoes of a legendary father is never going to be easy. And Adam Hamed, limited amateur background, making his debut as the chief support officially on a huge unified heavyweight title fight. I mean, you're kind of putting yourself in that shop window and sticking your head above the parapet to be shot at. But if he's got anything like the nerve and gall of his dad, and I say that in an endearing way, then he won't be worried about that. Macklin gunning for Bing's job as well. I don't even know where to start with that one. We wish Adam Smith all the best. We know he's going through some health issues at the moment. I'm not sure his job is up for grabs anyway. And Matthew Macklin is a fine pundit and commentator. And we'll leave that one very much there. Barry Murray says, Deontay Wilder is the most overrated boxer in my lifetime. Barry, you've got to tell us how old you are if you're going to say things like that. Seriously, he has very good power, but he's literally beaten nobody of note. ... Nobody. I like the way you underline that, Barry. I think Ortiz was a very good fighter, very skilled. Obviously, not the youngest and not the best work rate, but very good fighter. And Wilder beat him not once but twice. He also drew with Tyson Fury in the first fight. I know most people felt Fury won, but it was quite a close fight, and he did drop him twice. And I could name a bunch of kind of B-level heavyweights or B-plus level heavyweights that Wilder's not decapitated, but certainly destroyed. So I think you're being a bit harsh on Wilder there. Jim Reaper redresses the balance, though. He says Wilder smashes Joshua in 3 rounds or less. Barry Murray's 45. Barry, you're older than me. The hair might not back that up, but you're older than me, and you're saying Wilder's the most overrated in your lifetime. I'm not having that. Not having that for a second. He also says Ortiz was 42. Yes, Barry, if we live in a world where Ortiz is younger than you and slightly older than me, I'm happy to take it. I'm not going to read all your stuff, Barry Murray, because you're itchy trigger finger now. You're too quick for me. Auditing London and the World says, is Malik Scott a hypnotist? Still confused as to why Deontay chose him as a trainer. Ayman, what do you make of Malik Scott, the trainer?
It seems to be working for him. A lot of people speak about Malik Scott very well in terms of in the boxing circle. So look, I mean, another fledgling trainer who's looking to create their name and create their mark in this sphere. I don't think he's been all that particularly terrible for Deontay specifically. He seems to improve him I remember seeing those clips, and look, some of the clips were mocked, and some of them maybe deserve some of the mocking of seeing this big tall guy really kind of ducking down and awkwardly against like hooks and things like that. But I think the point that they're trying to make there is trying to get Deontay Wilder to do something out of specifically just the 1-2, 1-1-2, whatever it is, to knock out his opponents. And I think to look at Deontay and trying to fashion something new for him is the right idea for someone like Deontay Wilder, who just has that big right hand. So look, I think there's still a lot yet to remain. The jury's out on Malik Scott as a trainer, but he's got the opportunity to prove it, really, and I'm sure he'll get that. What do I call it?
Unremarkable.
I call it terrible. That's what it is.
El Terrible. It's the Eric Morales of haircuts. Let's get on with the rest of the undercard. I think we're going to get the poll result up soon as well. But Johnny Fisher was on the undercard, won his first professional title, big ticket seller from Romford, the Romford Bull. Beat Harry Armstrong for the vacant Southern Area crown. It's a very strange fight, I thought. Nearly got Armstrong out of there in round 1. Armstrong didn't look in the best of shape, but a really good guy and decent technically. Then seemed to get into the fight, maybe outboxed Johnny for a couple of rounds. And then his ambition seemed to completely desert him. And that may have had something to do with the body shots that the Romford Bull was winging in. And Johnny then took control and got him out of there. And takes the next step in his fledgling career. What did you make of it, Ayman?
I don't know if I quite saw it that way, Danny, really. I kind of just saw Johnny, who he had his fighter hurt and ready to potentially go, and then exerted a lot. Harry did well to stick in there, but I kind of thought that like Harry was sure back footing him, but I don't think he really was winning too many rounds, at least from my point of view when I watched it. I thought Johnny really had kind of the effective work and was really kind of putting some real hurt on him. I think there was an element of Johnny kind of putting a bit too much into that first round. But I kind of saw this as I said last week, a barometer for him and the work he's done under Mark Tibbs and him executing that. I thought he passed really with pretty much flying colours, like especially when you see someone like Jamie TKB, who might be a bit more talented than Johnny Fisher might be. Johnny is a lot more rawer, definitely. So maybe that talent will come through of what Johnny has in future fights. But for him to kind of go in and do that to Harry, I thought was a real kind of good hallmark for signs to come. And I think what it does is Johnny, for me, was never a gimmick at all. But the stuff outside the ring, which is I find quite entertaining as well too, can sometimes bleed into the overall package, and he should definitely embrace that. But there's a danger of being labelled or seen as a gimmick. And if anyone has that, sure, it's a Southern Area title, but that should now be dispelled and say, look, this fighter, this heavyweight, has definitely got something about him. Could be a talent in the future, and will look to kind of prove that he is that. So I thought it was a good win for Johnny. Hopefully Harry can come again. But at this level, it's a bit of a bad defeat, especially coming from or taking some of the shots that he took, I thought.
They fight next, and only 27 to Anthony Joshua. I'm guessing that other 1% spoiled their ballot or something. But yeah, 72%. That's more marked than I thought it was going to be, the disparity between those two figures. But yeah, I mean, I think this is what Johnny Nelson said today. He'd back Wilder if it was next. And I think general consensus is that AJ does need one or two more fights before taking that step. Auditing London and the World says Campbell Hatton progressing slowly but surely, needs more fights on small shows to hone his skills. Yeah, I agree. I don't think putting him in the spotlight on the AJ bills as they do regularly, and obviously he's managed by 258, which is AJ's management company. I don't think that helps him at the moment. I think he could do with building more under the radar. And then next time we see him on a huge show, it will look like he's had an even more significant improvement. But also on the undercard, I don't want to leave without talking about this fight. I had to watch it after all. Filip Hrgović against Dempsey McKean. A lot of time for Dempsey. He's always been really good with the channel. Don't know Hrgović as well, but obviously know his skills. Watched both of them fight several times. It was a pretty turgid affair as it turned out. It looked like probably Hrgović would get the job done around halfway, but then McKean showed real guts and determination to stay in there and to have his successes, if we're being fair. But neither of those guys showed anything that made me worry that they could bridge the gap between where they are now and the so-called big, what are we saying now, big four, in terms of Usyk, Fury, AJ and Wilder. I don't think they've got anything to worry about based on that showing. And that's the second disappointing showing from Hrgović in a row.
Yeah, I mean, not the most palatable of affairs on the undercard. Look, I think the more disappointing thing comes from disappointing aspect. Sorry, comes from Filip Hrgović, and you know, a couple of performances now where he's been less than expected. Really, the Zhang fight was a good fight, but because Zhang kind of really bucked what was seemingly the trend going in, or at least the thoughts going in from the boxing fans heading into that fight. But then you kind of look to say, okay, maybe Filip Hrgović had a bit of an off night, but this night against Dempsey McKean seemed to be again a bit of an off night for Filip. Not that he was in any way of danger of losing the fight, but just in terms of a lot of people expected Dempsey to be on the end of something devastating, and he did. I guess he did well to his credit to not be on the end of that before the final round. But it seemed like maybe Filip could push on and force that earlier, but he didn't want to. Again, look, he's got a mandatory coming up, so maybe that's part of it. Doesn't want to take any risk, regardless of what opposition he's against, whether lower in levels or not. Maybe that played a factor. But look, I think you want to send statements on a undercard like that, on a night like that, on a spot like that, and Filip just about sent that. And really, you should kind of be really forcing those statements home.
challenge if Usyk gets past Daniel Dubois in a couple of weeks. I think Usyk will be losing any sleep. He's probably not losing any sleep over Dubois, if we're honest, and maybe he should, because at least Dubois is a huge, huge puncher. But he certainly won't be losing any sleep over Hrgovic. And, I like Dubois. He's a great guy, but honestly, I'm seeing him tomorrow morning, so I hope he's not watching this when I say this. But if I had to pick, I would pick Usyk to win, as I think most people would. And I'd pick him to beat Hrgovic. I think I'd pick him to beat pretty much any heavyweight in the world, except maybe Tyson Fury. And it just underlines, watching that fight, underlined to me how much we need to see Fury against Usyk to find out who is the top. Because the gap between the elite level at heavyweight and the rest, even the ones coming up, is quite big. And I think it's important we find out before it's too late who the number one of this era is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. Like, whether we do find out, I remember I was speaking to Russ Amber, and the rest of that interview will go live very soon. And I said to him, "Look, you're part of the team with Usyk. Do you sit confident that we will see the fight between Usyk and Fury soon for the undisputed title?" And whenever I ask anyone that question, no one really sits confident right now, which is a real shame, a real damning indictment of the sport as to getting that fight and where we stand right now. Look, no one begrudges Tyson Fury getting a bucket load of money. We've always said that, and everyone kind of will carry on that feeling that fighters a short career, what they're doing is completely noble and admirable. So go get your money, definitely. But maybe as a WBC lineal heavyweight champion and someone who's really had the backing of the fans who've pushed you to the top as much as you pushed yourself to the top in your worst moments, are you obligated to give them that fight? Maybe so. Maybe you are. So maybe we should be seeing that fight ahead of Francis Ngannou. But yeah, look, it just seems like the waters have been muddied as to who really is at fault with both. It's that Spider-Man meme, who's really at fault here? Who's to blame here? So they've done well in terms of muddying that water. But look, hopefully we get that fight between the two, because I'd like to be there. Seconds Out would love to be providing the content that week, but the fight's got to be inked and signed, and that still remains to be seen, which is a shame.
Bois and Hamza Shiraz and their trainers and Frank Warren, I believe. If Frank Warren's there, it starts at 10 o'clock in the morning. They've advertised him to be there. But if I know Frank Warren, he's not going to want to get out of bed that early to go to Bermondsey. No disrespect to Bermondsey, but it's quite a trek from where he lives. But we'll see. Maybe Ted Cheeseman, the most famous boxer currently from Bermondsey, will rock up as well. I just say it because I don't know much about Bermondsey. David Hay obviously was from Bermondsey as well. Maybe he'll show up. Seems maybe less likely. But yeah, we really appreciate you watching. Please obviously like, comment, subscribe, all the usual stuff. We'll be back. We had a bit of a change of time this week because I was at the press conference earlier. But we'll try and get at 5 p.m. most weeks, if not all. And we'll be back next week for talking about everything that's happened over the weekend and any other breaking news within boxing. Ayman, some closing remarks?
Closing remarks. Look, it's a new form of anti-Joshua we're seeing really right now. So for me, that old anti-Joshua is dead and gone. Still, there's one last check, actually. I walked that back a slight bit. There's one last check. And that one last check is, what happens when you get hit? Do you revert to type? It depends what your perspective of type is with anti-Joshua. When he gets hit, are we going to see a fighter? Do you feel that you're going to see a fighter who wants to throw? Or do you think you're going to see a fighter who's gun shy? We'll have to find that out. We have to see that question. We have to see that fight materialize for the two. However, I feel right now, anti-Joshua is just about giving himself the best chance to, if he's got it in his locker to pull that back anti-Joshua back out from the past, then hopefully he can pull it out. But if he's got a few more strings to his bow, hopefully that will help him set up a way to victory against one of the heaviest hitting fighters ever in the history of boxing. So look, like the poll says, it's stacked up against Joshua. Can he do it? Yes. Will he do it? No. Will the fight get made? More important first. Let's hope so.
I just saw the automated YouTube subtitles change Bermondsey to Burner Boy. And I'm just dead from that. But yeah,
Well, yeah, I
thanks
guess you
all.
get the last comment, don't you?
Yeah. Well, really appreciate you all being here, and come back next week and every week. Boost us up on the algorithm, and yeah, we'll long may it continue. Live long and prosper. Yeah, see you all next week. Thanks again. Take care.
Cheers, guys.